All right, 7.4, parallel and perpendicular lines. So parallel lines are lines that have the same slope, just like railroad tracks. If they keep on going in the same direction forever and ever, and they never cross, and they never will cross. Otherwise, the train would go off the tracks, right? The wheels have to be kept separated at an exact same distance all the way down. So parallel lines have what are called the same slope, but there's something else. They have a different y-intercept. Okay, so for instance, the first line that I have here that I'm going to draw in green has a y-intercept of 1. So I go up 1. It's got a slope of 2/3, so that's up 2 over 1, 2, 3, up 2 over 1, 2, 3, or I could have gone down 2, back 1, 2, 3, down 2, back 1, 2, 3. Use a ruler, draw your picture of your line, make sure that all the dots line up. And that's my green line. The purple line, if you notice, has a y-intercept of -1. So it's got a different y-intercept, which is down here, but it's got the exact same slope. So it's going to be up 2 over 1, 2, 3, up 2 over 1, 2, 3, up 2 over 1, 2, 3, or down 2, back 1, 2, 3, down 2, back 3. Again, take your ruler, put on your paper, draw your line, and you can see right away that the way the points line up, they're never going to touch each other. They're never going to cross. And the two lines are the same distance apart all the way down. So these lines are parallel. What is the value of x if the slopes are parallel? These types of questions are basically just algebra questions. You don't have to graph anything. It looks like, okay, well, what are the slopes? Well, I have to know the slopes. Well, you're given the slopes. And you don't actually have to graph anything. And what is special about the slopes, about parallel lines? Well, they're the same. So I know that if I set up a little equation, -1/3 has to equal 5 over x. So how do I solve this? Well, I cross multiply. I multiply the -1 times the x, which gives me -1x, equals my 3 times 5, which is 15. So I know that x has to be equal to -15. You could even just look at that and say, well, I know this one's multiplied by -5, this one's got to be multiplied by -5, so therefore -15. Next one, I have 4 over 5, and notice, sorry, on the last one, that on the first slope, the negative was on top. On the second slope, the negative is going to be on the bottom, because this time I have 5 over 15, or 5 over -15. And that's okay. Remember that negative slopes, the negative sign is either on the top, or the bottom, or out in front, but not with both the top and the bottom. Next one, 4 over 5 equals x over 15. I set it up exactly the same way. The reason I do this is because sometimes it's not really easy to see what you multiply by. In this case, you could also say 5 to 15 is multiplied by 3. Therefore, 4 to x is going to also be multiplied by 3. Well, let's do it the long method. So you know that x right away is going to be equal to 12. So 4 times 15 is 60. 5 times x is 5x, because you have to know how to do this anyways for grade 11. And then I divide by 5, so that means that x is equal to 12. Plus it kind of double checks to make sure that, oh yeah, I was right. Last one, 2 to -10, I know is multiplied by -5. I'm going to have to multiply the bottom by -5, so I should get a 15 on the bottom, not a -15. Be careful of that. Or if you do the long method, 2 times x is 2x. -3 times -10 is equal to 30. Divide by 2, and I'm left with x is equal to 15. Next thing I'm looking at are perpendicular slopes. And perpendicular slopes are what are called negative reciprocal. And that means that I flip and change from a positive to a negative, or a negative to a positive. It just means I have to change the sign of the slope. So for instance, if you look at these two slopes, from 1/3 to -3, if I flip 1/3, I get 3 over 1. If I make it negative, I get -3 over 1, which is the same thing as just -3. Okay, so flipped and made negative. So for instance, this line that I'm going to draw in red has a y-intercept of 3, 1, 2, 3. It's got a slope of 1/3, so it goes up 1 over 1, 2, 3, up 1 over 3, or down 1, back 3, down 1, back 3. The other line that I'm going to draw in blue has a y-intercept of -1, which is down here. This time it's got a slope of -3, and remember that you can always put slopes over 1 if they're a whole number. So that means I go down 3, 1, 2, 3 over 1, down 3 over 1, or I could go up 3, back 1, up 3, back 1. So let's draw these two lines. First one in red has a positive slope, as we can see, and it's going to go up through those points. The next one in blue has a negative slope, which we can also see because it's sloping downhill, and goes through the blue points. Perpendicular lines, perpendicular slopes meet at 90 degrees. That's the whole point. So that if you draw them, it should look like they're meeting at 90 degrees, which these do. That's why you have to make them negative reciprocal. That's why one has to be positive, one has to be negative, and one has to be the opposite slope to the other one. So not only are they flipped, but they're also made negative so that they meet at 90 degrees. Next type of question for these would be, what is the value of n if the slopes are perpendicular? Well, I can't set them equal to each other this time because they're not going to be equal to each other. Remember that they're negative reciprocal, which means that n over 2 and 4 over 3, well, if I look at this slope here, if I negative reciprocal it, I would get -3 over 4. That's a negative reciprocal, so that's a perpendicular slope to 4 over 3. That means that n over 2 should actually be equal to -3 over 4, the negative reciprocal, right? Because they have to be perpendicular slopes. Therefore, now I can just solve this. N times 4 is 4n. 2 times -3 is -6. We divide by 4, so I get n is equal to -6 divided by 4, or, if I reduce that, -3 over 2. So sometimes it's not easy to see what I multiply by, or what the value of n is going to be. Sometimes it will turn out to be a fraction. Next one, again, we're dealing with perpendicular slopes, so they have to be negative reciprocal. So the -1/3, I can flip that. And -1/3 becomes, if I flip it, 3 over 1, or just 3, and the sign changes from negative to positive, so it's just 3. Now I can set these slopes equal to each other. I know that 6 over n has to be equal to 3, or 3 over 1, because it has to be perpendicular to that slope. Perpendicular to that slope means it's got to be 3, equal to 3. Next thing I do is I cross multiply, so 6 times 1 is 6, n times 3 is 3n, divide by 3, so I get n is equal to 2. And that's my value for n for that one. Two more questions here. First one is, write an equation that is parallel to this line here. Parallel means same slope, and I can see right away that the slope is equal to 3, and it's got to pass through the point 1, -6. So I set up my equation, y is equal to mx plus b. First thing I need is my slope. I have that already. Because it's parallel to this, it must have the same slope, so it's got to be 3. So y equals 3x plus b. Next thing I have to do is I have to solve for b by plugging in my values for x and for y. And I plug those values in for x and for y. So I get values, I get an equation of -6 is equal to 3 times 1 plus b. And I'm going to solve for b here. So -6 is equal to 3 plus b. To solve for b, I have to subtract 3 on both sides. So I get an answer, b is equal to -9. And finally, I can write my equation, y equals m, my slope is 3, x plus b is -9, and that's my equation. It's got the same slope, but remember that parallel lines have to have a different y-intercept, so it must have a different y-intercept. And we found the y-intercept by saying it passes through this point. Last question here, write an equation that is perpendicular to this line and passes through this point. So again, I'm looking at this line here. I know that my slope, it's perpendicular this time, so I have to flip it. It's got to be 3 over 2, and I got to change it from a negative to a positive. So it's just a positive 3 over 2 slope. And passes through the point negative 2 comma 0. So I have y equals mx plus b. I know that my value for m is 3 over 2, so I have y equals 3 over 2 x plus b. And then I can plug in my point negative 2 comma 0, 0 in for y, negative 2 in for x, plus b. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6, so I get 0 equals negative 6 over 2. Remember, when you're multiplying, you just multiply straight across. If it's a whole number, you put it over 1. And negative 6 over 2 is just negative 3. So I have 0 is equal to negative 3 plus b. Then to solve for b, I have to add 3 on both sides. So I get b is equal to 3. And finally, I write my equation. Y equals, my slope is 3 halves. Remember, it has to be perpendicular. X plus 3. And that's how you write an equation that's perpendicular to this line. It's got that slope. The y-intercepts don't matter this time because they just have to cross at a 90-degree angle.